Okay, so I'm going to kind of dive in and then I'm going to read the passage. So as I was preparing this, I was reminiscent of how interesting Saul's life is. And it really reminds me kind of what's happening in our day and age today, in the sense that, you know, whether we call it reality television or things that we watch in the media, Twitter, all of these things in which we kind of get to observe human interaction and progress of different stories and narratives that happen collectively as people. And as I was reading through Saul's story again, it's so played out like a mini-series or some kind of reality television. And so I was just kind of cracking up at how interesting God is when He tells us these stories. They're not just these stories that are a long time ago in the Bible, but really just stories that reflect on human nature all the time. Now, I'm not a huge reality star or reality television person, but there's something about it that really draws us in as we watch it. I remember coming home to my apartment when I lived with my old roommate, and she was watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, which is this famous reality TV show, kind of the horrible disgustingness that started a lot of what's happening in our day and age. But so I walk in and I was like, "What are you watching?" And I was like, "Why are you watching this horrible show?" And I sat down on the couch, and at first, she's like, "Oh, it's so interesting, it's so fascinating," and at first I'm like watching it with her, and I'm mocking it, and all of a sudden, an hour and a half has passed by, and I'm thinking the whole time I'm watching it that I have so much to do. I have shopping to do, I have laundry to do, I have work that I need to do, reading that I need to do, and yet I could not get my butt off the couch because I needed to know what was going to happen between Courtney and Sky in the next episode, right? There's something very drawing and appealing about reality TV because it's human interaction and it's human drama, and so there's something about it that really kind of connects us in whether a positive or negative sense. That's even more more intimate than a narrative or drama or a miniseries or something or a movie like that, right? Because it's like, this is a real person and they're going through real life things. It's not a made up story, so called, right? Now, granted, reality TV, there's editing involved and it's not real, and now we know that it's scripted or all those things. And yet there's something very intense and appealing about it. And as we're reading Saul's story, it just so reminded me of how things end up playing out, as we watch reality TV. Because we see in Saul's story, and I kind of want to go from the beginning to the end, in these few chapters that we read. It's only 2 or 3 chapters in which we really we find out about Saul, we hear about his reign as king, and then the demise, right? And so we see this whole arc that happens. And he's such an interesting, fascinating character, where he goes and he starts off really well and then ends up completely, again, spiraling downward because of wrong decisions that he made. A guy who had so much potential when he started out, and yet we see by the end just everything collapsing because of the choices that he's made and a lack of support system. So. Now, I love context, and so I want to give you a little bit about context before we get into this. So, Israel at this time, right, the nation of Israel, does not have a king. They have what we had called judges. So the book of Judges is beforehand. And what made Israel so special was that it didn't have a king because God was their king. God chose the nation, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, and said, I'm going to be your ruler, I'm going to be your king, and the judges are going to speak out on my behalf of what my decrees are and what my commands are. And so here we have this really unique, small country, like our congregation here, very small, and what would be no power, no resources, wandering around the desert. These people end up winning battle after battle after battle because God shows up time and again through these people called judges. And so Israel, all of a sudden, as they get up in the rising and people are starting to pay attention and know who they are, Israel goes and says, we want a king. We want to be like the other nations that are really cool, and we want a king. And so they basically really saddened God in all of this. Because here is this nation that was a nobody, and God said, I am going to show the world who I am, and show the world my glory through this small, tiny group of people. And basically Israel gave the middle finger to God and said, nope, we want a king. Like, we want to be like everybody else. And so Samuel, who was a judge at that time, reluctantly gives up, reluctantly obeys. And God hears the cries of the people and says, fine, I will give you a king. And Saul is chosen. So, I don't know about you, but it's kind of a really sucky way to start your kingship. You know, a prophet, a judge who's just like, fine, I'll give you a king, you know, I'll let you have one. And God, you know, it's just a circumstance in which it really wasn't this anointed, holy type of situation. And yet Saul gets chosen. And we see in the beginning, as Saul is chosen, how humble he is. In chapter 9, 19 through 21, Saul goes and seeks out a seer, and Samuel replies, I am the seer. Now go to the place of worship ahead of me, and we will eat there together in the morning. I'll tell you what you want to know and send you on your way. And don't worry about those donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, for they have been found. And I am here to tell you that you and your family are the focus of all of Israel's hope. And Saul replied, but I'm only from the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest tribe of Israel. And my family is the least important of all the families of that tribe. Why are you talking to me like this? And then again we see a chapter later in 10, 20 to 22. So Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel before the Lord, and the tribe of Benjamin was chosen by lot. Then he brought each family of the tribe of Benjamin before the Lord, and the family of the Matrites were chosen. And finally Saul, son of Kish, was chosen from among them. But when they looked for him, he had disappeared. So they asked the Lord, where is he? And the Lord replied, he is hiding amongst the baggage. He was so petrified and so fearful and so nervous about being chosen as king. He was hiding amongst the baggage. And so they found him and brought him out, and he stood head and shoulders above everyone else. So here is this man who begins his journey, we see. And he's very humble, and not at all prideful, and has no ego. And as we see, and in the way that he's described, he actually, by biblical and current world standards, could have been very egotistical. He's described as handsome, he's described as tall, he's very manly. This is very much in contrast to David later on. And so he had every reason to kind of be full of himself, and yet he was so humble in the beginning of the story. And we see as the story goes about the shift that happens. Later in chapter 15, we'll go into it. But after the battle that he wins, he's shifted and transformed so much that he's built a monument of himself in recognition of saying how awesome he is that he won this battle at the end of his life. And so, or at the end of his reign. And so we see just really how he's transitioned. He's a great soldier. He wins battles. He makes Israel powerful. And we see the progression of what this power does and the success, what it does as it increases to his ego and his pride. So let's dive into it. 1 Samuel 13, 8 through 14. So meanwhile, I'm going to read from the New Living Translation, just because I like how it reads as a story. Meanwhile, Saul stayed at Gilgal, and his men were trembling with fear. Saul waited there 7 days for Samuel, as Samuel had instructed him earlier. But Samuel still didn't come. Saul realized that his troops were rapidly slipping away. So he demanded, "Bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings." And Saul sacrificed the burnt offering himself. Just as Saul was finishing with the burnt offering, Samuel arrived. Saul went out to meet and welcome him, but Samuel said, "What is this that you have done?" Saul replied, "I saw my men scattering from me, and you didn't arrive when you said you would. And the Philistines are at Michmash ready for battle. So I said, the Philistines are ready to march against us at Gilgal, and I haven't even asked for the Lord's help. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering myself before you came." "How foolish," Samuel exclaimed. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. Had you kept it, the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom must end, for the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has already appointed him to be the leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." Okay, now, as we read here, I don't know about you, but I really believe that Saul in this situation is so relatable. And I look at him so empathetically, with such empathetic pity in my heart, because here we have a guy. Because I don't know about you, but waiting is horrible. It's just the worst. I hate waiting. I will, because I hate waiting, my to-do list is always like 1,000 things long. I will definitely go and be somewhere right on time or 10 minutes late, which I know is totally unfair and unjust to the other person waiting for me, but I hate waiting. And yet so much of what the Lord stretches us with is waiting, because it really shows what faithfulness is and what obedience and patience is. And so here we have Saul, who is waiting on Samuel. Okay, his troops are starting to scatter. Battle is about to happen, and Saul is pacing. He's just pacing back and forth, because he's like, where is Samuel? So I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in a situation where something big is about to happen, and you're just waiting on God, it's aggravating, it's infuriating, it's so frustrating, and it's scary, because you don't know what's going to happen. And so Saul, in his mind, as he's waiting, thinking something needs to happen, or else we're going to lose this battle, so we need to do something so that we can get God's help. In Saul's mind, it's really desperate times call for desperate measures. And I feel like we can all relate to that. I had a time, and this is my biggest really moment where I didn't wait on the Lord, in which started a 5-year wrestling desert journey with God. So I get offered this full-time high school director pastor position from my friend at this church, and shares with me all these things about the church, and they really, really want me to come. And so I was like, okay, well, I need to pray about it. So I prayed, and time is ticking, and it's coming along, and I don't have a green light from God. But I don't have a red light from God either. All I got was silence. Silence ticking away. And here comes a time where I'm needing to give the church an answer. Or else they'll probably hire someone else, etc., etc. So on paper, here is this amazing opportunity. Here's this battle, ready to be won. An amazing opportunity for me. And because it was just silent, I didn't wait for God. I pulled the trigger and I said yes to this position. Little did I realize later on, as I joined the church is very toxic. I end up working under a supervisor who is hired after me, who doesn't believe women should get ordained, fights with me and my coworker, constantly arguing why women shouldn't get ordained, even saying one of the reasons being because women have menstrual cycles and therefore we can't fully function as pastors. So I'm having to work with this gentleman. And these people in this church who are very, very old school and not, wanting to really understand how ministries should be effective with young people. And just, it was a constant uphill battle the whole entire time, which ended up a few years later leading to me getting fired. And that was a painful, angering, bitter time period for me during the time when I was serving at this church. And the whole entire time, I could just understand what Saul was going through. And even though I took the youth group from 15 students to 125 students within 8 months time period, it was just these people all around, the elders and, my senior leader who didn't want to get involved in the drama, and just all these circumstances that happened. It was unbelievable to me that, I was meeting such resistance, that I was going through such a difficult time period in this church. And after a year after getting fired, I was so angry and just going through all these things. And I met with a friend of mine who, as I was, praying through and just asking God, why, all these things. And I sat with a very, very wise friend of mine as I was sharing and relating to her this story of this painful experience that I'd gone through. And telling her, well, it was just, God was just, I don't know where he was. He just didn't show up. He was just being silent. And so what was I supposed to do? Saul's question. I felt that I had to do something. What was I supposed to do? This very wise friend of mine quietly replied to me, you needed to wait. And it's not like I didn't know that answer before, but it was like a Holy Spirit light bulb went off in my heart. And it was, I was supposed to wait. I was supposed to have the faith to know God hasn't answered me yet, and I needed to tell that to the church. And if they couldn't wait for me to hear from the Lord, to go on and hire someone else, I needed to have the faith to sit in this space until God gave me an answer. And the silence might have been my no. But I didn't want to hear it because it was so good on paper. Now, all that to say, that situation is that. Waiting is a very difficult thing because my mom and I have been waiting for my dad for very many years. For 40 years for him to come home and to come be back, with God. And it has finally come to fruition. Of course, not in the way we pictured it to be. God is very funny in how he answers our prayers. But my mom would, in her desperate moments, be so frustrated in the waiting that she would sometimes even go to fortune tellers, even though she knew it was against God. But the 40 years of waiting, I don't know if you've ever waited that long. Now, as we've waited so long for my dad to come back to the family, when people are like, oh my gosh, it's so long, I'm waiting 3 months, I'm like, child's play. You don't know what waiting is, right? And I'm so empathetic to the Israelites. 40 years in the desert, waiting to see when are we going to go into the promised land? Every day eating bland, gross manna. All they got to eat was manna. I mean, can you imagine, it's on the ground. Oh, it's a miracle. Manna is on the ground today. And then they eat it, and then the next day, oh, manna's on the ground today. And then they eat it, and then 7 days later, ooh, manna's on the ground today. And they eat it, and then 30 days later, manna's on the ground today, right? I mean, it's just so, yay, God is, showing up. And then I don't know about you, but, moving is terrible. Moving is terrible. I've moved 6 times in the last 2.5 years, okay? Moving is the worst. So can you imagine, you're in your tent, and you're all settled, you set up your pictures, you set up your bed, okay, all settled in, and then the cloud that is protecting you moves. And you're well, gotta pack it all up again and move again. And then you're just waiting, you're moving. You're all right, we're gonna be here for now? What's happening? I mean, I so empathize with the Israelites after 30-some years of this, can you imagine? They're like, we're done. We're building a golden calf. We're going to figure out how long we're going to be in this desert, like, because God is not showing up. Waiting is hard. You needed to wait. So simple. So difficult. So simple. So difficult. Saul didn't wait for Samuel. And it says in the commentaries, the burnt offering that he did was probably about a 60-minute ritual. If he had just waited one more hour, Samuel would have shown up. So Saul's number one mistake, he didn't wait. His second mistake that he did, as we read it, is the excuses. So when Samuel comes and confronts Saul on what he's done, instead of immediately saying, oh, I messed up, or, oh, did I do something wrong? And showing that he was ignorant. He knew what he had done was not correct. Because he starts immediately going into explaining and excuse mode. Now, we might read this, I read it, and I'm thinking, he has good reasons. I mean, not good, but at least somewhat legitimate reasons. He said, the people were scattering, like the troops were leaving. Number two, he says, you, Samuel, you weren't coming. You didn't show up. 3, the Philistines will now come down to me, and I need to cry out to God. Now, instead of doing it the way he should have, which is to be in prayer or gather the troops and show the troops how faithful God is going to be, he took control and he took matters into his own hands. 4, therefore, I felt compelled. What else could I do? I had to do this. It's one of the prime excuses we give to, people. Now, we see excuses happen all the time in Scripture, especially the first excuse ever given to God by Adam when they eat from the fruit. And he says, the woman you gave me tempted me, all right? My hands are clean, I'm just a victim here, okay? That's how it is. Saul is painting the exact same picture. What else could I do? So he gives these excuses. And so Samuel declares that Saul will now lose his kingship. And that in verse 14, the Lord has chosen a man after God's own heart. Now why? Now we know that's David. David's story is to come. Now why does God declare David as a man after God's own heart in reference to Saul? David by no means is perfect. Obviously, we read his story. He's so imperfect. I mean, he basically rapes the wife of his general and then gets his general killed to cover up that he impregnated his wife's, the general's wife. All right? Saul only did a burnt offering by his own hand. I'm thinking if we were to be watching reality television here, we would pretty much be in agreement of what the heck, God? David is a horrible person. All Saul did was do the offering himself. In God's eyes, this is not the same thing. To us, the sins are incomparable. We would definitely be on Saul's side. And yet, to God, he says, David is the man after my own heart. Why? Because David, at the end of the day, really understood what God wanted. David kept sacrifices, he kept decrees, he repented, and he sought after God because he knew that that was what was important to God. He knew what pleased God in his heart. Saul, on the other hand, kept sacrifices, decrees, repented, and sought after God because he knew that benefited Saul. The intention, the heart of the matter are two very different. And so in our eyes, the outer sin may be so big in its discrepancy. Saul merely did a burnt offering on his own fruition. David rapes a woman and murders a man. These are two very different on the outerness of the sin. But God sees what's in our heart. He knows the intention. David, because God doesn't ask for perfection. He doesn't ask us to be perfect beings. He knows we're going to mess up. If there's any guarantee in this lifetime that we live until perfection arrives when Jesus comes back, is that we are going to mess up. So God is not asking for perfection. He asks us to try to live a holy life, to try to live a life that is pleasing to Him. And that is not about perfection. It is about a heart seeking after what is pleasing to God. Saul was not asking that question. Saul wanted to know how he could benefit, how he can win this battle, how he can get more famous, more powerful at the end of the day. So, outer sin, huge discrepancy. Inner sin, huge discrepancy. And we need to understand this. As we get to chapter 15, the culmination now, the climax of Saul's story, right? We get to chapter 15. And in 15 verse 1, God gives a clear command to Saul, okay? He says, go, attack the Amalekites, and then kill everything, destroy. And we see again the clear command from God, and that Saul does not fully obey God's command. So he adjusts himself again, and he doesn't kill King Agag, and he lets the people take the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fattened calves, and the lambs. And then Samuel comes, and we see in verse 10, so this happens, and then we see in verse 10, this is where I'll start reading. Then the Lord said to Samuel, I am sorry that I ever made Saul king, for he has not been loyal to me and has refused to obey my command. Samuel was so deeply moved when he heard this that he cried out to the Lord all night. I want to emphasize when the Lord says that I am sorry that I ever made Saul king, the Lord is not saying that out of judgment and anger, but in pain. I'm sure parents understand, when they see their child making a decision that they know is unwise. It's not about being judgmental. It's about your heart hurting. You are pained to know that the child that you chose to be king isn't doing the thing that would be good, the thing that would provide the blessing to him. It isn't about anger and judgment. It's about regret and sorrow. So we need to understand God's heart in this. So early the next morning, Samuel went to find Saul. Someone told him Saul went to the town of Carmel to set up a monument to himself, and then he went on to Gilgal. When Samuel finally found him, Saul greeted him cheerfully. May the Lord bless you, he said. I have carried out the Lord's command. Then Samuel asks, then what is all the bleating of sheep and goats and the lowing of cattle I hear? Samuel demanded. It's true that the army spread the best of the sheep, goats, and the cattle, Saul admitted, but they are going to sacrifice them to the Lord your God, not the Lord our God, but to the Lord your God. This is how far Saul has come in his distance. We have destroyed everything else. Then Samuel said to Saul, stop! Listen to what the Lord has told me last night. What did he tell you? Or in the other version, speak. And Samuel told him, although you may think little of yourself, were you not the leader of the tribes of Israel? The Lord has anointed you king of Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and told you, go and completely destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, until they are dead. Why have you not obeyed the Lord? Why did you rush for the plunder and do what was evil in the Lord's sight? But I did obey the Lord, Saul insisted. I carried out the mission he gave me. I brought back King Agag, but I destroyed everyone else. Then my troops brought in the best of the sheep, the goats, cattle, and plunders to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. But Samuel replied, "What is more pleasing to the Lord, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice? Listen, obedience is better than sacrifice, and submission is better than offering the fat of rams. Rebellion is as sinful as witchcraft, and stubbornness as bad as worshiping idols. So because you have rejected the command of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." We see here Saul's relationship with God. So he lies, and then he excuses, and he lies again. And his response is basically, what's the big deal? And this is again why I say it's just so like reality television. We say this all the time now in our society. What's the big deal? Calm down. Right? I mean, like, when you read this, again, if we look at the outerness of the sin, what did Saul really do? I mean, in some ways, we're going to even say, can't we spin it like Saul is a humanitarian? He didn't want to kill King Agag. He wanted to use him for his military advantage. I mean, all the ways that we spin it in the modern world, we can justify it. What's the big deal, God? Take a chillax pill. It's not really that big of a deal. And Samuel needs to kind of get that stick. Oh, that was good. Like, what's the big deal? And yet, again, it's a hard matter. Because we see in the story how far Saul has gone with his relationship with God. And asking what's the big deal, though sometimes may be legitimate. We see it happening in our country now. We excuse things with locker room talk. We excuse things happening, of, oh, it didn't really do any harm. What's the big deal? And we see that was Saul's response. He lies, first of all. I have performed the command of the Lord. Lie. It's the people's fault. They brought the calves to me. Excuse. And the rest we destroyed. Lie. So he's so full of himself, he can't even let Samuel speak without him saying, okay, speak. I allow you. And so Samuel says to him, when you were little in your eyes, you were the head of the tribes of Israel. And he says, to obey is better than to sacrifice. As it says in Psalm 51, 16 through 17, you do not desire sacrifice, or else I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. So what does that mean for us today? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not the queen of anything, right? Like, so why does a king's story relate to me? And I love his story because we can all be Saul. The slow progression we see of Saul's heart, starting from a humble man to this arrogant, prideful person. My husband's favorite show is Breaking Bad, so he's made me watch it. It's been a very interesting sociological observation of male relationship and dynamics as a woman. But we see this story with Walter White, who's the main character. Beginning of the TV show, Walter is a gentle-hearted, good family man, very humble, very meek. And we see his progression as the show goes on in these crazy life circumstances, maybe out of his control, as we would see with Saul. The army is coming. The Philistines are coming. You didn't show up. My troops were leaving. These all seem like legitimate reasons. And so if we were to take these excuses that aren't responses of humility, but actual justifications of the decisions that we've made, that is not a broken, contrite heart before God. So let's go back to that church that I got fired from. Yes, 85% of my observation of the situation, I believe, is accurate. They were kind of crazy people. They were dysfunctional. It was a toxic church environment. But I need to own, honestly and humbly before God, that 15% of my heart going in, thinking, you all need me. I'm here to help you. I had that seed of arrogance in my heart if I were to be honest before God. And that seed grew the more the circumstances became difficult over time. And so as I'm going about getting hardened and bitter and more prideful, how dare you not believe me? How dare you not trust? I have all the fruit. Things are happening in the youth group. Calm down. That was in my heart to the point at the end where I could not pray for these people. I was being completely self-righteous, completely full of myself. Now, does that justify anything that happened in that church situation? No. But this is about me and God. That between me and God, I did not have a broken and contrite heart with Him. That in that moment, I was to kneel down and cry out to God and ask what He needed me to do, how I was supposed to act, how I needed to go forward with wisdom. And instead, my attitude was like, aren't you going to do something about these crazy people? Like, where are you? What's going on? I completely had an attitude with God. I did not have brokenness and contrite humility in my heart. And when we begin to make excuses, it's a sin of feminine. When we begin to make excuses, it's an avoidance of what I call the naked place. What is the naked place? As I shared, the first excuse humanity ever gave to God was by Adam, right? And when did that happen? It happened the moment they ate of the fruit and they saw their nakedness and they hid from God. And so excuses begin. Well, the serpent tricked her and she tricked me and you made all this happen. You set this whole situation up. I'm just the victim. Wrong place, wrong time. Excuses. Because we don't want to face the naked place. And that is why David, later on, is said to be a man after God's own heart. Because the moment God confronts him with his sin, he humbles himself before God, and he cries out, and he says, and he repents. And he asks and begs for forgiveness. And a lot of times, my students and my congregants, they say to me, like, oh, I can't go to church. I can't face God. And they paint that as if that's humility. That's not humility. That's pride. That's saying, oh, I gotta hide. I'm not good enough. I gotta get myself all together. True humility, true brokenness before God is saying, I have nothing. I'm messed up. I need to come before you, God. Help me. Be with me. May I know what pleases you. That is humility before God. And that is what Saul was lacking as we see his life. The reason I empathetically pity him is because Saul is so relatable. When we read his story, any of us would give the reason Saul gives in the lives that we live. And yet God is saying that our sacrifices are not what's important to him. And after that 5-year journey of silence that I went through, the desert wandering with God, I was so thankful to be blessed that God really powerfully outpoured the Holy Spirit on me and said, okay, it's time for you to come out of the desert. And now every day I wake up. And every day, sometimes some days are so hard. Every day I wake up and I say, Lord, may I never, ever have that kind of heart before you again. I never want to go through that wandering again. And so the moment I start bubbling up an excuse, bubbling up a bubbling up a justification, bubbling up a reason, I stop. And I say, Lord, no. What are you asking in this moment? As difficult as it is, as painful as it is, what are you asking me in this moment? May I stop? Stop with my reasoning, stop with my excuses, stop with my justification, because that is not what you need to hear, Lord. That is not what's pleasing to you. What is pleasing to you is me to come on my knees and to say to you, what could be pleasing to you in this situation? So as we go about our day in this coming week, we will be faced with difficult choices in our life. Choices in which we are required to wait, which is so simple and so difficult. We will be required to obey and make choices that don't make sense sometimes. So simple, so difficult. And in those moments, may we be as David, who obeys the sacrifices, decrees, and seeks after God because it is pleasing to God. And may we not be like Saul, where we seek out and obey and repent and do the sacrifices because we think that it would be beneficial for us. Let's pray. Lord, there are a few guarantees you give us in this life, but you have guaranteed us hardships and difficulty, because there is sin in this world, and there is pain, and there is suffering, and there are struggles. And life is hard. But the other thing that you guarantee us, Lord, is that you are with us, and that you walk with us, and that you love us, and that you are faithful to us. I pray for all of us here, and for those who weren't able to make it today. I pray that we would live every day. We would wake up in the morning and put our heads down on the pillow every day, kneel before you with broken and contrite heart, with humility before you, asking you every day, Lord, what would be pleasing to you today? How can I live my life today that would be a pleasing scent offering to you? Thank you, God, for never giving up on us. Thank you for just being the merciful, wonderful, supreme, great God of the universe that you are. We give you all the glory for this, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I made it!
All right.
30 seconds!